Accidentally turned off my iPhone there. Um, so last two studies that were presented were by, I'll pull them up here. It was Sarah and Laura, and they looked at exercise in the heat. Uh, First one that I'm going to discuss here is physiological and perceptual strain of firefighters during graded exercise to exhaustion at 40 degrees Celsius and 10 degrees Celsius. So I liked this study because it dealt with firefighters. So it's an occupational group that is often exposed to high temperatures, and they often have to perform high intensity exercise at high temperatures. So it's quite important to assess this occupational group. Testing athletes is interesting, and athletic performance is interesting, but um, occupational groups like firefighters who are going to be saving your life is also a great group to do research on. So, with this study, they compared firefighters while they were doing exercise at 40 degrees Celsius and 10 degrees Celsius. So, this was a graded treadmill exercise test they did under the two conditions. And I should point out that 10 degrees Celsius, that temperature is kind of the optimal temperature to do exercise at, whereas 40 degrees Celsius would be quite brutally hot. Um, and during these exercise tests, they were wearing their full firefighting gear and they were carrying extra weight, just like they would on the job. And they were interested in assessing perceptual strain to see if it would correlate with physiological strain. So the perceptual strain was determined by a combination of rating of perceived exertion, or RPE, and their thermal sensation. So they had a score based on those two variables. And then the physiological strain was based on a combination of their rectal temperature and heart rate response at the two different temperatures. So essentially what they found with this study was, you can read the summary, but everything became worse when they exercised at 40 degrees Celsius, except for the rectal temperature. So for some reason, the rectal temperature did not increase significantly in the 40 degrees Celsius condition, but everything else became worse. So their exercise performance became worse. Their VO2 max was worse. Their heart rate was higher. The lactic acid ventilation was higher at submaximal exercise intensities when performing exercise at 40 degrees Celsius. So I'm thinking that maybe the rectal temperature did not increase in the 40 degrees Celsius condition because maybe the exercise test was too short of duration, but I'm just guessing at that. But the main findings from this study was that the perceptual strain was well correlated with the physiological strain, except at the very highest intensities of exercise in the 40 degrees Celsius condition. So at high exercise intensities in 40 degrees Celsius, the perceptual strain was actually greater, was still increasing compared to the physiological strain. But I think that's a good, perceptual strain would be a good thing to measure in the firefighters, because if anything, it's going to be a conservative measurement. So if this is high, then you know that this will be high, except maybe in the most extreme conditions. So it's kind of safer to assess the perceptual strain, because it's going to tell you that you're um, at a high level of physiological strain, and more so, it's going to be kind of protective at those high exercise intensities, because this is actually going to be going up while this stays the same. So it's kind of a safety thing. So that was the one with firefighters. Again, I'm going to just refresh my computer here before I get to the last paper that Laura and Sarah presented. So this one had to do with, again, wearing extra clothes. But in this case, what they're doing is they're seeing if overdressing while exercising in normal temperatures can simulate the heat stress that you get when exercising with minimal clothes in hot temperatures. Why would you do this study? This study is important because I'm just trying to look for the summary here. So this study is important because if you're trying to acclimate to high temperatures, if you're an athlete and you're training in Saskatoon during the winter time and you have to compete down in Florida in a couple of weeks, I mentioned in class that it might be a good idea to try to exercise in like a hot environment, like a sauna, for a couple of weeks, so that you get acclimated to the heat before you go down to Florida to perform. That obviously is not always feasible. So an athlete might not have access to a hot room or a sauna to exercise in. And so an alternative to that is to wear a lot of extra clothing while you're exercising in a temperate or normal temperature environment to try to simulate the heat stress, to see if that could be the same as acclimating in a hot environment. So can you just wear extra clothes while you're exercising in a normal temperature environment and get the same level of heat stress that you'd get if exercising with minimal clothes in a hot environment, so that you could use that strategy to acclimate to a hot environment if you're living in a normal temperature environment. So what they did is they assessed the physiological responses to overdressing during exercise in a normal environment versus exercising in a hot environment with minimal clothing. And essentially what they found was that the overdressing did not match up well with the exercise in a hot environment. So in the hot environment, the rectal temperature was greater, the sweat rate was greater, and the heat shock protein production in the hot environment was greater than while exercising in a normal temperature environment but with extra clothes. Remember, those heat shock proteins are important for heat acclimation because they protect the muscle from further heat stress. And so all these acute changes that you would expect to see with exercise in a hot environment were not the same as exercising while overdressing. Other findings, they found some study, they assessed both males and females in the study, and they found that with the females, the skin temperature and heart rate were also greater while exercising in the hot environment with minimal clothes compared to exercising in a normal environment but overdressing. So bottom line is the acute response, physiological response to overdressing and exercising in a normal environment is quite different from exercising in a hot environment with minimal clothes. So I don't think that overdressing and exercising in a normal environment would be a good way to help you to acclimate to exercising in a hot environment. So that is it for the journal article summaries for today's class.